Good evening. I'm Alex Trianis, Dean of the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Distinguished Speaker Series, in which we discuss today's most pressing business challenges with highly accomplished business leaders. And this evening, we're pleased to have with us Lisa Chang, who is the Global Chief People Officer for the Coca-Cola Company. Lisa and her team are focused on creating an environment where employees can thrive. Prior to joining Coca-Cola, Lisa served as Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for A&B Group in Atlanta, which is a privately held sports and entertainment conglomerate. She has also held HR roles at various companies, including Equifax, Turner Broadcasting System, and the Weather Channel companies. In addition to her work at Coca-Cola, Lisa serves on the board of advisors for Catalyst, a nonprofit organization with a mission to accelerate progress for women through workplace inclusion. She also serves as a board member for the Coca-Cola Scholars Foundation, Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, and on the board of directors for Frontier Communications. Lisa has a bachelor's degree in communications from the University of Virginia and an MBA from the Stetson Hatcher School of Business and Economics at Mercer University. So Lisa, it is a pleasure to have you here with us this evening.
Thank you, Alex. It's nice to be here.
Well, we will, I'll start off with a few questions that I've prepared, but I'm really anxious to hear from our audience as well. And so audience members, you can submit your own questions using the Zoom Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any point. We'll pick those up a little bit later in this evening's program. So Lisa, it might be very helpful to set the scene for us if you could tell us a little bit about your role as Global Chief People Officer and what your team does at Coca-Cola.
Sure, happy to. Well, hopefully most people that are watching this tonight know of the Coca-Cola Company. We obviously are the producers of a certain beverage that has been around for, as of yesterday, 136 years. We celebrated our 136th birthday. We do have a whole portfolio of beverages that now, hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about some of the new things that we're doing outside of the sparkling beverage industry. But my team is in charge of the human resources function for the global workplace, and that includes functions in over 220 countries where our products are served, and we have employees. That includes over 65,000 company employees and 700,000 system employees, which is a partnership with our bottlers and our ecosystem that actually manufacture and distribute our products. We have over 500 brands, as I mentioned. And what I see my role as really is being the steward of the culture of the organization, the identifier and builder of talent, and an organization where we're focused on our purpose, which is to refresh the world and make a difference, and making sure that we have the most passionate people out there that service our products and get them to market and into the hands of consumers.
Well, I love the way you characterize your role as Chief People Officer, and you mentioned a few things there at the end, and I'm curious, how do you differentiate it, or how do you think it differentiates from what one would traditionally talk about as human resources?
Yes, definitely. I've been in the field of HR so long that it was previously known as personnel. So when I first joined HR, it was called personnel, and it might still be called that in some places. And a lot of things that our function takes care of, we still take care of, like paying people, benefits, learning and development, and some of the kind of more process-oriented items. But I think over the years and the way we view our function today, as a lot of those are the necessities that employees come to expect their employers to do for them. And so through the way we service our organization, through technology and through other things, we have now made that a more process-oriented part of our jobs. And we instead are focusing our time, energy, and brain power really around the pieces that I mentioned, which are engagement, growing talent, and identifying the skills that we need and the capabilities that we need for the future. So still there, But those are the things that we really say, it's the price of entry. You have to do those things. But if we do those things well, we actually get to spend our time on the much more interesting work, which is work that's focused on our people.
And not only interesting, but strategically, it's become so critical now for every corporation. I love how you talked about being a steward of culture, and it's become more difficult in many companies to maintain culture and to shape work culture. And particularly, I imagine for a company as large as Coca-Cola, as you said, 220 companies, if I got that right, and with your 700,000 system employees, with the independent bottling companies, how do you set culture, maintain culture, shape culture in that kind of a very, very complex environment?
Yes, it's a great question. And actually one that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about over the last couple of years. I've been in Atlanta for almost 30 years. I worked at some of the companies that you mentioned. I've only been at Coca-Cola for 3.5 years. And so if I think about the culture of Coca-Cola, a lot of it is ingrained in our history. And so I mentioned our 136th birthday yesterday. And every day I'm reminded about pieces of our culture from the past that still affect how we do things today. So I talked about our purpose of refreshing the world and making a difference. And just over the weekend, in celebration of our birthday, we had been sharing some stories and some other videos and things from our past. And Robert Woodruff, our former chairman and CEO, was a man of great purpose. And a lot of the work that he did to make Coca-Cola what it is, which is not only the company that we provide beverages, but really the corporate citizen that we are, is embedded in the way he led the company and the way we established our purpose. And so I would say a lot of how we embed our culture is focused on our history. So we do use a lot of storytelling. We try to make sure that people understand that Coca-Cola was always about communities. So if you go way back in time, at moments that mattered in the history of the company, when communities needed help, Coca-Cola was there. We still do that. And so there's a lot that we sort of bring new people through and remind them of it. The great fortune that we have is our brand is so well known that people actually can make that connection fairly easily, because when you see a Coke commercial, you see our products, you think of community, you think of people, you think of the Hilltop ad that we did in the 1970s, I'd like to buy the world a Coke. And so everybody sort of knows that we are about inclusion and history. So I think we have that going for us. But two, I think the real question, how do you keep it going in a very diverse organization? It takes focus and energy. And just like anything else, you have to cultivate and curate that culture every single day. And that's why I say my job is really the steward of the culture. You can't make culture happen to an organization. It happens through the people. And the best way to do that is to kind of make sure that the leaders live and breathe the culture and they lead through the culture, that we hire for people who understand what our culture is. And we stay very connected with our bottling partners in our system, so that most people don't know that Coca-Cola is made up of a corporation that sort of is the center engine, and then an entire independent bottling system. But when you get that product on the shelf, it's kind of unseen, all the different touch points, because we do spend a lot of time making sure everybody understands that we're one Coca-Cola and what that brand stands for.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's very difficult for companies that have been around for a long time to kind of maintain that legacy and be able to sort of be very modern and forward looking. And clearly the community, the sharing aspects have become even more important now. I'm kind of curious, when you talk about the purpose of refreshing the world, I don't know how long you've been using that language, but it obviously evokes not only the quenching one's thirst, but also allowing one to sort of pause, right? Which is kind of a key word that everybody is talking about these days. Is this part of sort of rethinking sort of how to communicate?
Well, interesting you should ask that because refreshing the world is something that has been around, as you said, in our vernacular for a long time. I don't even know how far back it goes. But curiously, in 2019, shortly after I had joined, our CEO, chairman and CEO, who had just been elevated to that role as well, he's been with the company for 25 years, but was just elevated into the chairman and CEO role. We sort of had a conversation with our leadership team, and we said, we're about to go on sort of the next transformation phase of our company. And we think we need to revisit purpose because we were obviously feeling the signs and signals that purpose was an important part of businesses today. And so we actually took months and had different teams of people around the world helping us kind of look in and look out and say, what is our purpose? Does it still stand? What should it be? Should we update it? Those types of things. And the very curious thing is when we went back to the archives and we pulled the information from before, refreshing the world, as you said, was exactly what we felt like we needed to do. And it was perhaps back then, it was more about the quenching of the thirst. But in today's world, it made a lot more sense that it was a much more holistic refreshing, refresh the mind, refresh the body, refresh the spirit. What we did add was, and to make a difference. And that was something that historically has been part of our company. We've always talked about the conscience and we've talked about giving back in communities and doing the right thing. But we felt like for this point in time, in our business and in our society, that there was a piece of giving back of corporate stewardship that we felt like we needed to overtly articulate. So that's where the refresh the world and make a difference came together. And that again was pre-COVID. That was like 2019, and then all of a sudden COVID hit. And so it's just, I don't know if it's fortuitous, serendipitous, or whatever word you want to do. It's kind of happened. And then that purpose really became the center point for how we led through the next couple of years.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about those next couple of years. It's always interesting to sort of hear the experiences of different companies. So I guess a couple of parsing it out a little bit. First of all, just thinking in particular really about the last year, going backwards in times a little bit, talking about the Great Resignation. So obviously as a chief people officer, you're very focused on how your employees decided to stay, or those that were interested in switching careers and so on. So could you talk a little bit about how that's impacted Coca-Cola overall, the whole ecosystem?
Yeah. So, because we have so many different pieces and parts to our ecosystem. So the front line is the bottlers, the merchandisers, the truck drivers. That's a pretty significant part of our population. So let me talk about that for a minute. That is probably where we've felt the most stress in our workforce, like every other company that has frontline workers, if you will, because those are the people who worked throughout the pandemic. They didn't get to telecommute because they were delivering products and making products and merchandising them in the stores and transporting them. So I think what we experienced there was some sense of turnover, but we didn't have as big of a shortage as some of the other companies and industries had. And I think some of that has to do with, again, our brand equity. We have long service in our bottling system and with our partners. And so a lot of those folks, I think, remained very loyal to us. We tried very hard to look after them very carefully. We were very focused on health and safety and making sure that they didn't have to make a choice between coming to work or caring for themselves or their families in cases of sickness and illness. So we enhanced and added additional sick paid leave to cover if anybody was contracted COVID during that period of time. So I think there were a lot of things that we did there, but obviously that space has been the tightest, not to mention the wage war that's happening. And so I think that area, again, our local bottlers have experienced a lot of turnover and challenge. And then we won't get into the details of how the vaccine situation started to put even more pressure on that because we had to make some decisions about that. In our professional workforce, What I would say is we have not experienced to the level of tension that I think a lot of other industries have had with the Great Resignation. We, of course, have lost people and great people to other opportunities for pay or for personal reasons, et cetera. But I think we've been very fortunate that we went through a big reorganization in the middle of all of this as well. And we very intentionally created pathways and opportunities for people to make a choice about whether they stay with the company or left based on where we were headed strategically. So I think because we did that just before the full-on Great Resignation started hitting, people who may have been waffling about staying or going made choices just before that happened. And so we've been able to maintain a pretty good retention rate of the people that have been here.
And in general, you mentioned a number of changes that you adopted during COVID. Are there any that will, and you also talked about the reorganization as well. So it does sound like there's a number of changes that you all made, which will remain. Were strategic, not just, they weren't just tactical to get through COVID, but were really more strategic that you hope will continue in place for quite some time. Are there any others that you haven't mentioned in terms of flexibility and so on?
Sure. Let me just touch for a minute on the business side of it, because I think it's really important that, you know, as an organization, we were on a transformation journey before COVID. So as I mentioned, the reason we decided to relook at our purpose is, you know, our CEO had decided that we were going to go on this beverages for life journey. So I mentioned at the beginning, we are called Coca-Cola, the Coca-Cola company. And when your name is your product, sometimes you kind of worry a little bit about how far can you stray from that. But what we decided several years ago was that we really wanted to be more than just the Coca-Cola company as one product. We actually wanted to have a portfolio of products for our consumers. And so we implemented what we call a beverages for life strategy. And that is, we want to have a beverage for every person and every occasion for when you might need it. So that's everything from coffee to dairy to tea to juices to sparkling beverages like the Cokes and the Sprites and the Diet Cokes. But also we've entered into light alcohol. And so we have really been working on this process. And we were starting that before COVID. When COVID hit, we realized that we really needed to adjust our strategy quicker. And the reason is because if you think about what happened, just like hospitality and travel and some of the other businesses, our business was significantly impaired during COVID because most of our products, or a lot of our products, are served on premise. Food establishments, restaurants, stadiums, sporting events, concerts. And so a significant portion of our business literally dried up overnight. And so that's when we said, we need to accelerate our transformation and let's think about how we can do that in a smart way. And it wasn't about cutting jobs, it was about readjusting the way we do our jobs, right? And so we started adding more positions in the digital space. How do we do home delivery? You know, because the big Coke truck is not going to drive in front of your house and drop off one bottle, right? And so how do we do that last mile supply chain and some of these things? So that was the business side that we were planning to do anyway, but COVID accelerated that. On the people side, as you said, we literally overnight for our office workforce went completely virtual for more than 2 years. And if you had asked me 2.5 years ago if we would ever go to a virtual world, I would have said never. It's never going to happen, and certainly not all the time, every day for 2 years. But we did it like most other businesses. And I actually think we thrived during that period of time because we are a global company. And so what it did is it created a level playing field for people all over the world to be able to collaborate. And so a big part of our restructure was to create this networked organization where people got rid of hierarchy and worked across. So I think that was a really great outcome of the situation. I think now, as we're starting to encourage people to make their way back to the office, We are dealing with a little bit of a conundrum where people say, hey, I kind of like this flexibility that I have, and I don't really want to come back to the office. So, how are we going to make this work? And so we have introduced what we're calling flex work, and we're really just trying to take some baby steps. We're not coming down hard and fast and saying you have to be here X number of days a week or X weeks a month. We're really saying, let's find ways to work together. And when we come together, let's make it purposeful. And so we've sort of said the 3 C's. You come together when you want to create, collaborate, or celebrate. So there are things that just work better when you can be in person. And let's make those moments matter. And then all other things, sure, you can work remotely, you can work from home, that's fine. But remember, I said we are a company of community, and our products bring people together. And so it's kind of hard to do that, tell our customers to do that if we don't do that. So we're trying to find that balance, but like everybody else, we're kind of stepping into it slowly and trying to kind of bring people together. We had a birthday celebration at the campus last Thursday, and we used to do this before the pandemic every year, but it was well attended. We had lots of people there. We had food in the courtyard, we had music, we had giveaways, we had all kinds of things, and it was really fun to see people together again. So we're hoping that we can coax people, out of their pajama pants and sort of back into the workplace to at least get some of that energy from each other.
Yeah, I think out of the create, collaborate, and celebrate always comes first.
Celebrate always works.
That's the easiest one to get folks together. So, we were talking about COVID, and again, as a global 220 countries that are represented as a global enterprise, there are other global crises that obviously impact people a lot. So, supply chains obviously getting disrupted, but also recently sort of political issues, the war in Ukraine. I'm just kind of curious, sort of, do you approach these on a one-off basis? What kind of playbook do you all have to get ready for these, for what may not start as a people crisis, but sort of becomes a big people crisis for a large corporation like yours?
It's a great question. And I think, again, pre-COVID, I think we had business continuity playbooks, as you said. But I think all those books got thrown out because these were things that we had never experienced before. We never really thought that every single person in our company around the world, in every country that we operate, would be impacted. You always kind of think about a crisis in one place or one function or one location. So it was a little bit different. I would say, I'm going to start to sound like I'm repeating myself, but our purpose drives the decisions that we make and how we look at all these crises. And it really is about taking care of people, both in our company and in our communities. And so when you look at the situation like the war in Ukraine, we have employees in both Ukraine and Russia. And our bottling partners operate in both, because you can get a Coke pretty much anywhere in the world. And so when those types of situations happen, we have to be thoughtful and measured about our response. But our response is always firmly focused on people first: health, safety, well-being, taking care of folks. So when the situation happened in the Ukraine, our immediate response was the health and safety of our people, and how do we get people to safety? So we literally were helping mobilize to get people who wanted to leave the country to a safe place, to people who were in the country to have the shelter that they needed. And then you start to move into the business decisions of, do you operate in this country? Do you not operate in this country? And that's, again, where our purpose and our values come in. And we really do try to make those decisions in the best way possible to support that. What I would say about the work that's going on over there is we maintain our stance that we want to continue to support human rights. And so that is a big part of who we are. Our Russian employees, while we are not currently operating in Russia, we are finding ways for those who want to maintain their employment with us to do work in other parts of the company. So obviously our Russian operations have ceased for now, and we are continuing to try to find work for those people to do global work or work in other parts of our company. But it's really challenging because we are in so many countries. And if even I think back to what happened with COVID, we literally watched COVID go around our company as it hit country to country to country around the world, because we're in every single country. So when it started hitting in China, we were looking at it like, oh, what is this? And then it went to Europe and Italy and kind of made its way around. So it's a challenge to do that. But I think, again, leading with values and purpose really helps us make the best decisions that we can make, to keeping our people and our communities in mind.
Well, I want to switch to talk a little bit about DEIB. And by the way, you can always answer every one of my questions by leading with value and purpose. That's perfectly fine. Obviously, there's fantastic opportunities and problems to address at the same time, right, around the DEIB space. And it seems particularly, again, complex, not to keep repeating myself, but particularly complex for an organization, a global organization like yours, to try to figure out sort of how to address DEIB, not only, let's say, in the context of the US situations, but also globally, right? And so I'm just curious, how do you address DEIB in sort of a holistic way from a global perspective?
Well, we've defined sort of two big objectives and aspirations on the DE&M front for our company overall. One is a global one, which is really focused on women. And we have an aspiration to be 50% led by women by 2030, and that's a global aspiration. So we've said to all of our operations in all the countries in which we operate, we want to see a balanced leadership team around the world. So that's something that we're very focused on, and we have quite a bit of infrastructure via both employee, we call them inclusion networks, which are employee resource groups. We have a global women's leadership council that's led by one of our senior women. That is a group of men and women that come together to help the company drive initiatives like mentoring around women. So we have a lot of infrastructure that we've put in place to drive that global initiative. On the race and ethnicity front, we have an objective to mirror the markets. And so that is unique based on where we are market to market. So here in the US, we obviously have objectives to be represented by Black, Hispanic, Asians, and that's something that we're very focused on. In other parts of the world, like in Latin America, we do have a Black Brazilian strategy. So I think what we try to do is be philosophically aligned around our objectives, which is, again, as a consumer-based company, we got to focus on mirroring our consumers and the markets where we operate. And so that necessarily means that the strategy, the goals and the objectives locally might be different, but overall our strategy is the same, which is to represent the markets that we are. And so what helps us with that is we can talk about the same strategy and purpose and values, but we implement locally based on, again, different things. And we advocate for the things locally that sometimes need to be advocated for.
And I think, Lisa, I've shared with you before that we're very proud at the Carey Business School that we are majority women in our various programs. So if all business schools can do that, then we'll be all set to help you all out at the leadership level as well in a few years.
Yes, absolutely.
I mentioned earlier that you serve on the board of advisors for Catalyst, which is a nonprofit organization with a mission to accelerate progress for women throughout the workplace. You've also, I didn't mention this earlier, but you've also been a speaker for the Asian American Business Roundtable. So I wondered, from a personal perspective, if you could just talk a little bit about why these organizations are important to you and how you hope to inspire others through your work there.
Yes, thank you for the chance to talk about those. I think as I have progressed in my career, I recognize that I am in a visible role, and I have not only great responsibility for my work, but to advocate for people who don't have the platform that I have. And so Gender equity is something that I'm personally very passionate about. It's something that obviously our company is very committed to. So being a member of Catalyst, I think, is important for us to state not only our company objectives, but our personal objectives around helping women in the workplace achieve those goals and objectives and to ensure that parity. So I get a chance to participate in Catalyst with a lot of other great organizations, moving our agenda forward. It is something that we lean on heavily because of our 50-50 objective. And with the Asian American Business Roundtable, I'm a member of that as well as several other AAPI organizations. It's just obviously growing up Asian in America, it's been something that I've not always really been in tune with. I grew up in a small town in Virginia. It's not something that I really thought about until I went to UVA and I saw a lot more diversity. And I started asking myself the question, wow, that's interesting. I wonder if they're having the same experience I'm having. And I learned a lot about myself and about the AAPI history, quite frankly. And interestingly, I just had a conversation the other day with an Asian journalist. And I was sharing with her that my senior thesis at UVA was around the underrepresentation of Asians in media. And that was 30 years ago. And she and I were having a conversation about some of the circumstances that happened. And that was at the time when the Detroit auto workers were very upset because of the Japanese, quote, invasion of their jobs. And there was a lot of violence against Asians. And so what happened during COVID, and it's continuing to happen around the senseless violence and hate crimes that are happening, is something that is, really, really disturbing to me, that even 30 years later, and it's much longer than that because Asians have been in this country for a long time, we're still dealing with that. So if I can use my voice and my platform to raise awareness to some of these causes and help educate people on misperceptions that they might have, or quite frankly, just help other Asian leaders assume responsibilities and roles, then I feel it's not only my responsibility to do so, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. I'm a mother of 3 kids, all growing up Asian in America. And so I'm hopeful that some of the work that I do will also benefit them in the future.
That's great to hear, and obviously inspirational as you lead your team internally and help them understand some of these challenges. That's wonderful to hear. We are getting a number of questions in. Some of them sort of overlap with topics we've talked about, but I'll get to those in 1 second. But I just want to encourage everybody to continue putting their questions in the Q&A Zoom function. Before we get to that, I just wanted, this is switching gears a little bit, but everybody knows Coca-Cola well for its marketing campaigns. You mentioned a couple earlier on. I'm sure our marketing students, really all of our students, and even us, faculty and staff and alumni, would also like to, I'm sure, hear about some of the new initiatives that are in the works. Whatever you can share with us.
Yeah, that'd be great. Definitely. We announced earlier at the beginning of this year a worldwide partnership with the agency called WPP, one of the most well-known marketing agencies in the world. We did a big global RFP to find a partner that could be side by side with us around the world. And so this relationship with WPP is new territory for us. We've never had a global partner that is basically the partner that we have in every single country around the world. It's new for them because they've never had such a fully integrated partnership. And so what we're trying to do with that is a couple of things. One is to use the benefit of scale. Makes a lot of sense, but again, when you're in over 200 countries, sometimes you lose sight of the tactics behind it. So in the previous organization, there were times when we had many marketing agencies all over the world doing similar work with a slightly different twist. And while that might seem like it's okay, if you think about cost efficiency, brand preservation, et cetera, sometimes things can get a little divergent, right? So people take liberties locally to adjust things that they think make sense, and then the master brand might suffer a little bit. So some of the work that we've done has been really protecting the core and making sure that anything for sort of our core brands remains at the global level. So we're not sort of taking liberties with things that we shouldn't. but that where it makes sense that we're adjusting the approach locally to make sure that our consumers can really feel a connection to the brand, right? So there might be some things that we have to do culturally, nuanced wise. And so this partnership with WPP is allowing us to do both. Big brand, how do we, kind of speak to everyone, but yet locally, how are we going to execute? The other interesting thing that I'm really excited about with that partnership is the fact that we're taking the opportunity to look at talent differently. So in the marketing world, you can be a company marketing person or an agency. Those aren't the only exclusive ones, but those are the two most common. And a lot of times they don't necessarily intersect, right? So you hear somebody from a company side, they'll say, well, it's kind of hard to make the leap from a company to an agency to a company. So we're really interested in playing around with this partnership to see if we can jointly create new talent skills of people who have kind of intersected between those. It's almost like in the academic world, the interdisciplinary studies. How do we make the two work together so that someone coming out of these experiences actually has a little bit of both? Mm-hmm. So that's exciting for us because that's something that we've never really done before and WPP hasn't done before.
No, that sounds incredibly innovative and obviously gives folks, whatever side they're on, and the sides are blurring, obviously, an appreciation for what it's like to view it from the other side as well. So that can only lead to a stronger relationship. That sounds great. Okay, a couple of questions from our audience members here. I'll make this question a little bit briefer. During these challenging times when people are being hired, when employees are not working in person as often, how do you approach socializing or indoctrinating, which I think is meant from a positive perspective, new employees into the culture?
Yeah, it's something that we had to learn throughout COVID, right? Because there were many people that were hired during COVID that never saw a person, never came to our workplace for, the better part of almost 2 years, which was strange. But I think what we did is we adapted very quickly into this digital space. We tried very hard to do things like onboarding in as fun of a way as we possibly could. We did leadership conferences and other meetings where we tried to embed a little bit of sort of the coffee talks and trying to get to know each other. So I think we tried to do what other companies did too. She tried to mimic.
I'm almost finished with this.
Oh, sorry.
I think we're good. Yeah, go ahead.
So we tried to mimic the environment that you're normally in when you're socializing with people. And so I think some of that worked fairly well, but I think there's still nothing like meeting in person. There are just a lot of benefits. I actually met quite a few new employees this past week at our company birthday who had never been to the campus yet and had been here a year or more. And I said, well, what's it like? And they said, it's better than I imagined it being, because I think a whole year of anticipation was built up around what is it going to be like when I get to go to the Coca-Cola campus. And they said it exceeded their expectations. Some of it, as you said, was probably because of the food and the drinks and all the other fun stuff that we had going on. But I think people really enjoyed that personal connection.
And another sort of connection related question, which I think is important. I appreciate the transparency for setting an aspirational goal of having 50% of women in leadership positions. What best practices have you learned in engaging men as allies in doing the work to create gender equity and parity at Coca-Cola?
Such a great question. And I think a really important comment about the allies and certainly the men in the organization. So there are a couple things. One is I mentioned that we have this Global Women's Leadership Council, which is made up of senior people in our company that actually help us drive initiatives like mentoring, like learning and development, and some of the other sponsorship programs that we have. That council is made up of half men and half women, because we know that the men in the organization who have leadership positions need to be those allies. And so we are very intentional in saying that we need them to be part of the process of bringing women along. So that's something that's really important for us. we also have implemented and offer the training through Catalyst called MARC, which is an allyship program that educates men in the organization on how to become allies. What does it mean to be an ally? How do you advocate? How do you sponsor? How do you recognize talent? How do you make sure that the women in the organization get what they need? It's kind of like that book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are from Venus. We just think differently, right? And so if you're a male leader and you have, a young female talent, you might not think that it's important to ask questions about how are you doing, or let me give you some feedback on X, Y, and Z. So these programs help managers, our male leaders, understand what exactly can they do to make it better for the women in the organization. And MARC stands for Men Advocating for Women in the Organization. Men advocating, what is it, Tyree? Men.
Real change.
Real change, yes.
Yeah.
So that's a great program.
Catalyst.org/MARC, MARC. For those of you in the audience, if you want to read more about that. So another question which came in that I'm going to put a little bit of a twist on is, could you share some of your experience on managing lifelong and effective mentor-mentee relationships? And I guess my twist on this is, have you been mentored both by women and by men? And maybe you can say something in terms of what you've gained from a different perspective from each.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have both men and women mentoring and advocating and supporting me. And I have had, very fortunately, lifelong mentors, and many of them are people that I've stayed connected with over the years. And as I have, been able to achieve the success that I have in the roles that I have, I often reflect back on those relationships and the conversations that I've had. And very recently, I've connected with a few of them who were really instrumental at pivotal points in my career and giving me some really great advice, and in some cases, some very frank feedback. I think that's another thing that's an important part of being not only an ally and a sponsor and a mentor. Is it's great to have somebody patting you on the back and telling you you're doing all these great things and encouraging you and helping you build your confidence. It's another to have somebody very transparently give you feedback that either no one else is saying or is worried about giving you. And those are the most precious gifts, because I've had several of those throughout my career where people have really just taken it upon themselves to say, hey, I care about you and your success, but here are a couple things you need to pay attention to because they could be derailers, or here's something that you might not know that you're showing up as this when we know your intention isn't that. And just someone recognizing that and being able to say that to you is so important. So I think that continues to be, it's important to find people to be part of your circle that not only, give you the attaboys and the attagirls, but can be honest and truthful and be that reflection.
So to that point, I just want to share with you simply through your comments today, the impact that you're already having. So if I may, as they say, a comment and then a question. So the comment is from one of our audience members, not a question, but as a fellow Asian American woman who grew up in a very small town and is now in a leadership role, I am grateful for your advocacy. Representation matters so much, and it's so inspiring to see and hear from game changers and leaders. Oop, it just moved on the screen for me. Just give me 1 second. Game changers and leaders who look like me. So I wanted you to hear that, first of all. And I'm going to follow that up with a question, which, let's see, here it is. Thank you for your time, vulnerability, and candor. In a world, and especially here in the US, where there is so much division politically and culturally, how do you approach that in your global role? What is your leadership philosophy with regards to navigating those challenges? So you talked a little bit about working in the diversity space sort of globally, but if there's anything more you can add to that.
Yeah, I think this is such a great question because the last few years have really highlighted a lot of tension in our in our country. So I'll focus on US, but obviously this goes on around the world. But obviously in the US over the last few years, with the COVID pandemic, with social justice uprising, with the political divide that we've had, it has been just a super challenging time. And it seems like no good deed goes unpunished. And so every time somebody thinks that they're doing the right thing, there's somebody that's always looking at it from the other perspective. And so to me, and this is sort of Lisa personal reflection, it's highlighted a couple things. The first is that social media, while a great thing because it's sort of democratized voice, can be very dangerous because I think a lot of people can perpetuate things at an instant, right? In the old days, we had to issue a press release and it was very orchestrated and nothing happened until all that stuff happened. Well, now it's the click of a button and anyone around the world can say anything they want. And so that's very, very dangerous and hard for a company like ours that has a brand that everybody knows. And so the way you get through that is to go back to your purpose and your core values and to know that no matter where you fall on decisions that you make, a good half of the people may not like it. And they may choose to express their opinion about it. And that's okay, because that's, again, what the foundation of this country is. But I think companies need to be consistent with what they do and what they say. And it has to be driven by that value system. I think where it starts to go astray is if you're trying to respond to the different voices and you try to bend to accommodate, that's where it gets very difficult to maintain because it just changes so quickly. And so, there are times when it's very difficult to sit by and watch things happen or watch people say things, and it's very hurtful to certainly me as a representative of the company when I hear and see things. But I feel very confident in the values of the company, and I know that the intentions that we have are specifically aligned to that. And so I try really hard to focus on that and focus again on our principles, our purpose, and on the fundamentals that we really do care about our people and our communities. And so that helps me a lot. And I've just, again, been very fortunate to work for some very purpose-driven companies. And so that gets me through because sometimes it is tough.
Well, and I think, again, related to that question, I'll read this question, but let me just preface, I think it's a nuanced question regarding sort of your comment about stewarding culture, preserving culture versus moving forward. So let me just preface it by that and then actually read the question verbatim here. Earlier, earlier in the conversation, you characterized your role as a steward of culture. While I appreciate your dedication to preserving a culture that Coca-Cola has long cultivated, but do you think a stewardship approach is conducive to change in attitude towards such issues as gender equity, fair representation in leadership roles, work-life balance, and so on? So I don't know if you, I'll let you comment on that.
Thank you for asking the question because it gives me an opportunity to expand on that. It's a great question. And what I would say is there, like everything else, there are elements of our culture that we love and we try to preserve. And there are elements of our culture that we want to change. So let's be clear that 100% of our culture is not the same as it was 136 years ago, and nor should it be. But some of the core values that I mentioned, the principles, the making a difference, the communities, the storytelling, and some of those things are really important. And we try to take the best of those from our historical standards and we try to bring them forward. But then to your point, we have to change. I mean, our company would not be in existence for 136 years if we didn't change. We have to adapt, and we're continuing to change to adapt to consumers' needs. And our employees and our leaders need to do the same. And so absolutely, those are elements that, and we have literally been on a culture change journey. And some of the things, and I'll just give you an example of some of the things that we're trying to change. We have traditionally been a very hierarchical, traditional company. It's like levels in the organization and, kind of the formality of going up the chain of command, going across, then coming down the chain of command. That has been part of our existence for a long time because that's how it was done in the early days. We have deconstructed that, and I mentioned we've moved to this networked organization where we're really trying to create connections in a horizontal way versus a vertical way. That's an important culture change that we're trying to make. We're also trying to get away from the notion that the people in the corporate functions know all the answers. And so again, the corporate people used to tell the people in the field what to do. We're trying to kind of, again, flatten the organization, turn it around to actually some of the best ideas come from the field. So let's not, again, do these types of things. So I think to the question and the intent of the question, I would say we try to preserve the things that we think are good, that are fundamental and foundational to who we are and what started this company. And we try to always continue to move. It's definitely a transformation that continues. And someone shortly after I joined said, when are the changes going to stop? It seems like we're always changing. And, my answer to that is change is good. Change is growth. Change is positive. And so we really do try to balance the two, having, again, the continuity and the predictability of who we are and as well as the future. And the same thing applies to our brand. So we try to have that classic Coke there because that is our foundational history. And we try to make, adjustments to that with some of the other products like the Coke Zeros and the Diet Cokes and some of the other things. But then we try to expand into new categories of some of the ones that I've mentioned to you. I think people that worked here 20 years ago, if you told them we might get into light alcohol, they would say, no way, there's no way we're ever doing that. But we've decided to kind of go where the consumers go. Right. So I think there are some things that we try to balance on both sides, but it's a great question.
So going to where the consumers are going, and also before you talked about sort of going to where employees are going as well. So we've touched on this a little bit, talking about the Great Resignation. But the question asks, how you would explain it. And then is this an illustration of the renewed need for purpose for companies to engage and retain talent? So, you talked about to make a difference, is adding that on to refreshing the world, maybe a little bit more about sort of how you're seeing that changing employee need for purpose and how you're addressing that.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. If I reflect on how we got to where we are with the Great Resignation and certainly even sentiment of employees, I think we knew 20 years ago, we knew that there was going to be a shortage of talent in the marketplace because of demographics. We had the retiring boomers. We sort of knew that the birth rates were lower than they were before, and that there was just literally going to be a supply-demand issue. So we knew that was going to happen. But then what happened, I think, during COVID is, they sort of recoined it the great reevaluation as well. A lot of people just kind of went internal and said, okay, what am I doing? This pandemic, this global pandemic has caused me to think about, is this how I want to spend my life? Am I doing meaningful work for myself? Am I spending time on the things I want? Do I want more time with my family? Do I want to go back and pursue education? Do I want to start my own business? So I think it's a combination of all those things that have sort of led us to where we are. And, I think as a company and as an organization, what we're trying to do is we've just launched or relaunched, if you will, our development plans, really. And we've put it in slightly different context with our employees, which is we really want to help our employees be their best self, right? It doesn't say be the best accountant, be the best salesperson, be for the Coca-Cola company. It's a very general, broad statement, help you be your best self. And we think that's an important part of where the world is moving. People look at it as a job now, as a job more than ever, right? And so if the work doesn't have purpose and meaning, a lot of people are finding they're not getting the fulfillment. The fragility of life became very present during COVID. And so I think it's up to us as companies to make sure that the intersection of people's interests and their passions and purposes intersect with the companies. And I do think that that's going to be important for companies for a long time. And you're starting to see that in companies that were great companies that all of a sudden there's a little waffling happening because that piece is missing, or it's disappearing, or it's not as important as it was before. So we believe that that's going to continue to be an important part of what drives people, and the intersection of company purpose and personal purpose is that sweet spot when I think companies and people can do great things together.
And obviously, as a business school, we're trying to get our students to be their best self and to find their passion, to follow their passion. And I know that a number of our students who are in the audience have a passion for people. And so should someone want to become the chief people officer of a company, what good advice would you give them about how best to prepare for that?
I guess it wouldn't be a good sales pitch for me to say reconsider. No, just gosh, you know what? I can't honestly say that I sought out to have this as my career aspirations and goals. I'm actually, interestingly, I was telling my parents over the weekend, I was with them for Mother's Day, that I was speaking today. And, you know, I will say that there was a great sense of pride on my father's face, because he wanted me to go to Johns Hopkins Medical School and become a doctor. So I said, well, Dad, I never made it there, but I'm getting to speak at the business school. Does that count for anything? And he said, well, not really, but sort of. So I think the best thing to do, in my opinion, is to continue to seek out experiences, not jobs, but experiences that give you really the tools to get yourself into an organization where you can do the work that you want to do. And I think another thing that's happening with HR, which I really, really love and advocate for, is you don't have to have that traditional, like, I'm going to be a benefits person or a comp person, and I'm going to work my way up the chain of command. We are finding lots of business people that are coming from other functions into HR, because the realization is HR is part of the business. It's not some separate thing. I mean, the decisions that we're making impact the business every single day. And so having general managers and frontline leaders and marketing folks and financial leaders and strategy people in the seat of HR is great. Some of the best HR leaders in the world that are running big companies came from the business. And so I think there's a big advantage to doing that. So what I would love to see is a little more kind of crossover between business people, HR people, and vice versa, because I think it makes a difference. And I had an opportunity in my career when I was at the Weather Channel to leave the HR function for a little while, and I was in a product line managing a small business. That forever changed the way I looked at what HR's role was, because when I was in that seat, some of the administrative things that we talked about before, that was the last thing I was thinking about. I just wanted the payroll to work, and I wanted people to have their benefits. What I really wanted to focus on was, how do I grow talent? How do I make sure I have the right skills and capabilities? And that really changed my mindset into, okay, nobody really cares if I'm making changes to the payroll system. They just want to get paid. So I think it's important that you continue to find the experiences that make you a relevant business person. And then, you know, being a chief people officer or a leader of a people function is really about having a passion for developing others and making sure that your organization has the right skills to move forward.
Well, and I love when you started with the word reconsider. It has become obviously an increasingly difficult job, and at the same time, as you mentioned, an increasingly important job in any organization. It's the most important strategic resource. So you've done an amazing job. You're clearly working on so many great initiatives with a very complex organization. So just on behalf of Carey Business School, I want to congratulate you for everything that you've done. And thank you so much for spending this last hour with us to share some of these insights with us.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for having me. And again, it really is truly an honor to be part of the program here, and to say that I was able to speak at Johns Hopkins. That, I think, is going to go a long way with Dad for a while.
You can check that off the list. Thank you so much again, Lisa, and thank you to all our audience, and we'll see you at our next Distinguished Speaker Series event. Bye-bye.